Honorable Tony Gibbs, Engineer Omar Alaha, and it will be chaired by Engineer Tony Parasram. So thank you very much, guys. We will start. Thank you, Neil. Thank you.
Okay, we'll make a start. Folks, we're going to make a start. We're not going to take too long with this because we are running behind. And Matthew. Yes, do you know?
My apologies, and the fourth panelist is Matthew Devu, who is a contractor. Yes. Thank you.
You're here, are you?
I am.
Okay, so if we go over, it's Shalini's fault because she's timekeeping. So I've said I'm not going to be doing that in case I screw it up. So my name's Tony Parasram. I know some of you and some of you know me from previous conferences and just being around in general. Have you enjoyed it so far? Yes? Yes, we can give it up? Yes, why not? What I'd like to do is, this is really about hurricanes, and that's what's printed in your agenda, but we're going to go a little bit wider than that, because I think we've heard quite a lot today, which is pertinent to hurricanes and resilience and what have you, yes, but moreover, I think it's resilience and sustainability as a whole. I'm going to ask you, first of all, if you've got any questions for the panel, and we are going to keep it brief. There's a roving mic somewhere. We have the roving mic, so we'll have a mic. We have another mic over there. Has anybody got any questions for the panel specifically? Anything at all? Nothing? Well, that concludes our Q&A session. We can all go to cocktails now. No, all right, I'll kick it off. So one of the things that started us off was the Minister of Housing, I believe, Adrian Leonce, and he made a statement, which is this: we engineers have a critical role to play. I'm going to join together three statements and then put the question to Shalini, which is, so the first statement is this: we engineers have a critical role to play. Second statement is this: we need to promote energy conservation even when the client doesn't ask for it, which I thought was interesting, even when the client doesn't ask for it. And the third statement: Trinidad and Tobago does not have a building code. Okay, so here's the question. There's clearly a global societal need, but no legislative framework. How do we go about designing for resilience and sustainability when we don't have to? Nice easy one for you.
Thanks, Tony. A very easy question. For me, at least. So the work that I've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years, or 15 years or so, has been predominantly in disaster response. Or it's a massive focus of the work that I do. Earlier today at one of the breaks, I had a chat with one of our colleagues here, and she asked me, how do you have the energy to do this? Because like I said, all of what we do here is volunteer work. There's still a job and a business and everything else that we run on the side of things. So why focus on resilience and sustainability and doing something better for the environment? And when you see what happens to countries when you get impacted by major natural hazards, major storms, hurricanes, earthquakes, you see the level of devastation, the loss of livelihoods. That exit plan that I mentioned this morning, where you're going about your business as normal, and then we get that earthquake that triggers liquefaction in Port of Spain, like Dr. Elias had pointed out, and suddenly your lives get turned upside down. And then you're wondering, well, what can I do now? The question that we should be asking ourselves as engineers is, what can we do to prevent things like that from happening? And that's the reason why when you're working on projects and when you're doing things, you're not just focusing on, yes, okay, they want me to do this is my budget, this is my timeline, this is what they want to achieve. How can I get this done right so that in 30 years or in 50 years, we still are able to sustain the livelihoods that we have? Remember, climate change is not about sustaining or saving the planet. It's about saving human lives and our livelihoods.
Okay, so are you saying then that it has to speak to an inner humanity for the care of others?
Absolutely. As engineers, we have a responsibility to society. That's what we signed up for. That's what we agreed to do. When you do your job, you always put 110% forward, and it's not about the bottom line or making an image or looking good or saying I've delivered 100 projects. It's delivering one project that's able to save lives and maintain livelihoods of just one person.
Okay. I'm going to go around the room very quickly. Yes, we've got a question over here.
Why isn't there a national building code?
Mr. Gibbs, do you have an answer
Yeah,
to that?
Tony Gibbs is probably best to deal with that one.
It's only Trinidad and Tobago that does not have a national building code. And I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. It's puzzling to me. It's puzzling to me. It's equally puzzling where the country in which I currently reside, Barbados, is the only English-speaking country in the Caribbean that does not require you to design for anything. There's no legal requirement to comply with any standard in the design of a building. None.
Okay. We have a question over here. Do you want to wait for the microphone so we can all hear you? Sorry, before you start the question, is it? Sorry. Yes, Tony Gibbs is asking us to put to every Trinidadian in the room why there isn't a national building code. I think we can hold that one. If you'd like to, if the question is to the general panel, please say so, or if it's to an individual on the panel.
It can be two, Mr. Gibbs.
Yep.
Because as a practicing engineer, I am still not clear about why do we need the national building code within the sense that, for example, in Trinidad, we have a Ministry of Works that says if you do not design to these codes that we have on this list that we publish every 5 years or so, we will not give you approvals, and therefore you will be in contravention of the town and country laws. And once we're doing any buildings, even at the regional corporation level, we do in fact design to the IBC code, the ASCE codes, that sort of thing. So to my mind, if as an industry, we are practicing it, and then they are actually enforcing it by not giving approvals for it, my question is, what is the legal issue in terms of having a national building code as opposed to having a Ministry of Works directed policy related to use of codes in practice?
Okay, I mean, that's an interesting point, because that speaks to the direct adoption of codes elsewhere being brought in as the governing criteria. If we take that point, Neil Thomas mentioned earlier about the 50 kPa live load for the guns by the bay, which was an adoption from the UK codes. And as we know, you don't get snow in Singapore. So my question to the panel on the back of that statement, that there are other codes that we design to in order to get the approval certificate, is it a direct adoption, or do we have the capacity to interrogate them for their application? In other words, this is to anybody on the panel. It's to anybody it's an open to the panel, which is, if there is the direct adoption from other codes, IDC and ASC and so forth, as Neil pointed out, Singapore codes were an adoption of the UK codes. Do we have the capacity to vary from them, local to Trinidad design, because they are brought in from offshore? Omar.
Hello. I don't know if this is on. Yeah. Hello.
No.
I have another one, don't worry.
Yeah, go.
To reinforce Eric's point, I have several clients, governmental, non-governmental, that I also say that we follow international codes. We may not have a building code per se in Barbados. We have a draft building code. It's been in draft for 20 years now. But as a professional engineer, we have a responsibility to design to international codes. We have many projects where we've pointed out we're doing a lot of renewable energy stuff now. These solar farms are not designed to the sorts of hurricanes that we're supposed to be designing them to. Nobody's checking There's no department that's checking to make sure that it's done properly. But I don't want any claims on my PI insurance, so we do it properly, right? In terms of localizing it, again, codes give you a little flexibility as an engineer. Yes, you guided by them and you work within them, but you have to use some engineering judgment as well in a local context.
Okay. I think Professor Desano's got...
I have a comment based on what Eric and Omar just mentioned, because I think from an external point of view, I don't know the local dynamics, having different code brought in from different parts of the world may have a very large risk, which is firstly creating conflict between the contractors, even the designer, because some code could be based on less, let's say, conservative approach, other could be more conservative, but more importantly, particularly if you look at the load that you just mentioned, that could be completely ill-defined for the area. And when it comes to implementation, that can give rise to something that probably have very low safety or very high safety. So you can get to two extreme, which I don't think is fair, if I can tell from, as I said, an external.
It's a fair point. Go on.
It is
Hang on.
true. Eurocodes have national annexes, right?
Yes.
Even the Eurocodes, they have very specific annexes attached to them which are deliberately focused on that particular country. So whether you have and I get the point that's being made about codes of practice, but I'm completely with you. There are things within codes that are written generally for not specific conditions. So having a national building code, I think, is fundamental, because then there's no argument about it, because it's specific to this island.
And sorry to jump on this again. It should not be necessarily prescriptive. Since now everything is performance-based, it can be sort of guidelines, and then probably with annexes or even with engineering judgment, which should drive most of the projects we have seen that are sort of unique projects, then you can implement them.
Do we have any lawyers in the room? Lawyers will have a field day with that one. Okay, moving on. I'm going to be unashamed about this. I've stolen this one from Mike Haig. And that is, this is to Tony Gibbs and to Omar. So the statement, Mr. Gibbs presented this compendium of information that is freely available. First hurricane recorded in the South Atlantic, I believe, in 2004. Are you going to nod? Am I right on that? Hurricane in the South Atlantic. 2004?
In which country?
Brazil.
Yes.
Okay, I got that right.
That was the first hurricane ever recorded in the South Atlantic.
Okay, and
however, that's not the whole story. Because there might have been hurricanes in the pre-satellite era. Now, in the pre-satellite era, hurricanes were recorded in the North Atlantic because there was a lot of traffic. Sailing ships were plying the traffic between Europe and North America, between Europe and the Caribbean, between Africa and the Caribbean. Whereas there was not that much sea traffic in the South Atlantic. So there may have been hurricanes in the South Atlantic which were not recorded because they didn't pass close to a sailing ship and there were no satellites. However, that does not take away from the fact that hurricanes in the South Atlantic, even if they were there, must have been extremely rare.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what is unequivocal is that they are becoming more frequent and more ferocious. So here's the question to Mr. Gibbs and Omar. Even if we don't have a legal imperative, knowing what we know, i.e. they're more frequent and ferocious, do we as engineers feel legally exposed? And the framework for that question is, we may design to codes, we may be covered in our PI because we've designed to a code, but if a lawyer in 5 years' time says you knew statistically this was the case, do we feel legally exposed? Mr. Gibbs and Omar.
The answer is yes. I can give you two reasons. First of all, codes do not tell you how much to design for. They say you must not design for less than a certain amount. So if you design for the minimum standards in a code, you are planning to produce the worst building that the law would allow. And so no code tells you that you must not use higher standards than the code. It says you must not use lower standards than the code. That's what it says. That's one reason. And many of the English-speaking countries in the Caribbean follow British law practice with precedent. And in British law, there's the code is not required. Simply complying with the minimum standards of the code is not sufficient.
Okay.
You have to use your judgment in Britain. There's another reason, and Omar has an example, and I have an example, and you'll hear his example from him. My example, well, I mentioned before that Barbados has no legal requirement to comply with any standard, but Barbados does have a formally printed by a government agency National Building Code. 1993, the National Building Code was published by the Barbados National Standards Institution. After 1993, a particular hotel on the West Coast was designed and built. And after it was designed and built, an English tourist, a young lady wearing a bikini, I saw the picture, walked through a glass sliding door and was lacerated by the broken glass. She sued Virgin Holidays, not in Barbados, but in London, because she purchased her package deal in London. And the judge in London was faced with a defense which says there's no requirement in law in Barbados to design glass sliding doors with any particular quality of glass. That's true. And the judge in High Court in London says, I don't care that there was no law, but the document existed indicating what was meant to be good practice in Barbados, and even without a law, you should have followed the document. And he judged in favor of the lady who was paid a sum of money as damages by Virgin Holidays.
Okay.
So
Omar.
Yeah, I have a different example, but I'm not going to give you that one. That's a very difficult question you've asked.
Sorry.
Earlier, Neil was asking Tony, are the wind speeds going to get worse? Tony said the scientists said it's going to plateau. There was a famous American baseballer and economist said the future ain't what it used to be, right? And at the moment, we can only do what the knowledge we have and design within those parameters. Karen was asking earlier about the public service here that uses an older ESC code. And as engineers, we have to make sure that we know what we're doing with the latest codes, teach ourselves the latest codes, go CPD and all the rest of it. The codes have been changing. They've been using new wind models, updated with the latest data. At the iStructE in the Caribbean, we are trying to get some funding to have the wind codes in the Caribbean updated. Peter Vickery, who did the last codes in 2016, used 2019, says that we now have about 10 years more data. So they use a Monte Carlo model to do it and they change the model to see the actual events. So they tweak the model all the time to make sure that, so they need to tweak the model again. So we need to do that. We need to do the earthquake maps. There's several things that we need to do, and if we don't do them, we might be legally exposed because we'll be using out-of-date data. So it's important that we try to design within the parameters that we have now, and unfortunately, I can't predict the future. Yeah.
Okay. I'm mindful of time. Any questions on the... We have a question over here.
We have a contractor that needs to be asked.
Oh, no. I've got
I
one.
was happy to sit quiet, to be honest.
I've got a doozy coming up for him.
I have a question for Mr. Gibbs. He has a tremendous amount of work regarding the wind that we are using in our design. And he said that all this work is available on the net. But how is that communicated within the engineering community? There are plenty of people that I believe they do not know that all this data exists.
That's why we're here.
Exactly. No, my point is that I believe there must be a solution that a body like, I do not know, maybe the Board of Engineers or whoever, communicate with the government bodies and put things in place so there will be announcements, right? And they say, okay, we have to do this, we follow the other thing. And many times things change within the Ministry of Works, and the engineers do not know about it unless you do a project and eventually you are going into the office and they return back your work and they tell you, oh, we are not using this anymore, you have to change it now. And then you go back and you redo all the work and, yeah.
Well, as I mentioned earlier on today, the information is available. It's freely available. It's on the internet, and we all have access to the internet. But there are certain organizations who make an effort to distribute this information. One is the Institution of Structural Engineers Caribbean Regional Group, but there are others. There's the Council of Caribbean Engineering Organizations. There's the Association of the Commonwealth Societies of Architects in the Caribbean. There are the various national organizations. There's a requirement in some of them that you have to do CPD, you have to do continuing professional development to maintain your membership, and that's an opportunity for that or those organizations to put on lectures. But the information is available, and if you really want to find the information, you can get it. But there's a lot of information which is not available, and which are gaps in our knowledge which need to be addressed in the near future. One of it had to do with intensities of rainfall. Very few English-speaking Caribbean countries have intensity, duration, frequency graphs or tables to provide rational information for rational stormwater drainage design. And every country in the Caribbean gets damage from rainfall due to flooding every year. So that's one area which needs to be plugged. But the other area is in earthquakes, because we have graduated towards using ASCE 7. And ASCE 705 is specified by Trinidad and Tobago Ministry of Works precisely because we don't have the information for using the 2010 and subsequent editions, 2016 and 2022. And so that area, that is an area where we need to plug the gap. And there may be others like that.
Okay, thank you for that. Again, mindful of time, I'm going to ask one final question before we summarize, before we close up. We have a question over here somewhere. Yep.
I was going to suggest, this is something I've seen done in the energy sector, where there might exist a problem or lack of knowledge in a certain space, where companies within the sector come together and fund what is called a joint industry project. More or less, you identify an expert or expert company that can provide the relevant research, or university, and all the relevant stakeholders that may be impacted by that gap of knowledge come together and fund a project to do it. Isn't that something that, does the panel think about that, where a body like our group lobby the sector, whether it be other engineering organizations, engineering companies, etc., about if we don't have to wait for government. Why not, we know what we need, why not come together and see about funding itself. In how
I'm
we-
gonna redirect that question to Matthew.
Actually, I'd like to answer that question.
Okay.
Since Karen directly asked iStructE, I assume. Of course, Matthew can also respond. Now, this is work that we have been looking at and we have been doing. The gaps that Mr. Gibbs identified in terms of IDF curves, in terms of updating seismic hazard data, updating the wind hazard maps, and other information that we have missing across the Caribbean. We are aware of quite a bit of it, and we have been looking at it. We are in the process of preparing, but the thing about what we try to do is that it is a collaborative effort. So everyone here today, this is a question to all of you. If we identify gaps, and we know that there are many, would you be willing to step up and say, yes, I want to be a part of that? Whether you actively contribute time, or whether you say, all right, fine, I can help fund a part of the work that you're doing. Is that a yes from this audience, or is that, oh, well, I'm not that interested?
As a contractor and an engineer, I'll give an example. We do get involved in design because we do design build. So I really would like to see where there is an opportunity where, we have a standard wind speed. We were tendering a temporary structure around the savannah, and we tendered it. And of course, as a contractor, you're trying to be competitive. So we went with a wind load that wasn't the design wind load. And actually, Honorable Tony Gibbs was of guidance to me back in 2011. He hasn't sent me an invoice yet, so I wouldn't say too much. But but we had this argument with the Ministry of Works over the wind speed because it was a temporary building. It ended up staying up for quite a few years. But I think it is time that we have, it's got to be documented that, the wind speed for X is, whether it's temporary or permanent, for earthquakes, whatever it is, it's time we get those documented,
Okay, moving on
And
from.
as a general contractor, yeah, we'd be happy to support it, Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew.
There's a contractor on the panel intentionally. So going back to what we've heard before about collaborative working. So this is a question to Matthew, which is, we're engineers, we're architects,
Thanks.
we are in the profession in this room, and we're preaching to the converted. This is a bubble, and we're all loved up on the idea of resilience and sustainability, which is not embodied in a code or legal requirement. So in the absence of that, what are the practical obstacles as a contractor to to engineers designing and getting it on site a sustainable and resilient solution? What do you think would be the practical obstacles whilst being competitive and everything else?
Well, I think it comes down to the client very, very often. Is the client willing to spend the money? I've been in construction in Trinidad for 21 years, and in those 21 years, I've only ever built one retention pond, right? And it's something that struck with me. This was 2009 we built it. But you just think that, you just look at the damage that we see with all the rain, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's just a 12 o'clock rain in Port of Spain. And yes, we are guilty of it. All we do for a livelihood is build, 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 build. But none of those projects in 21 years, except one, have I seen an effort by the client, driven by the client, to put in retention ponds within their site to retain that water. And I've always marveled at it. And to me, it's something we should be doing across the board on all our projects. We need to contain that water and let it go out slowly, that we're not contributing to the mess we see, whether it be Port of Spain, whether it be all the cities that we see up and down the islands.
So Shalini's put out a challenge, and to all of us as designers, and you're going to join that band collaboratively to lobby for things like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. We are out of time. I think we're out of time. Are we out of time? We are out of time. So it'll just be for me to give a shameless plug for... put your hand up if you're a graduate or an undergraduate. Let me see who we got in the room. A graduate or an undergraduate. Come on, don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. They're all over there. And they're all over there. Okay, for the rest of us, I'd like you to note that the undergraduates and the graduates are all at the back of the room, right? And huddled together in little pockets, just like the uni theatre, I guess. But this is really for yourselves in getting involved. This is an iStructE conference, and it really does need your voice. It needs your energy. It needs your voice. There's a lot of us who are back in the UK sit on various committees and boards. I know the CRG group did as well and continue to do that in the UK, myself included. And so it really needs your voice and energy. So if you need a kind of a thought, a guidance, advice or anything, come and see us, because you really do need to get involved and be heard. So I'd like to invite you to thank the panel in the usual way.